Sorry. Yay! Okay, let's get started. Sorry for the little delay there. That was me and my slides. Apparently I don't know how to use full screen. Ugh. Anyway, welcome to my talk. As you can see, the title is Working Backwards, and it'll be about working upstream and downstream, which is a problem that a lot of us faces. We'll be going through a couple of key themes at the moment that have been explored a lot in the last couple of days, namely being open development and open collaboration. So if you went to the keynotes, you would have heard Jonathan talking a lot about open development, open collaboration, and open source. And if you went to Tirikaz's talk yesterday, open source is not enough. There are definitely going to be some similar themes coming out of this talk as well. All right, so you're all either here because either A, you saw a pigeon video from 2014, or B, you're interested and keen to find a little bit more about how to work more effectively with open source and your company. So this is a favorite quote of mine from Mike McQuaid, and it says, "In the technology sector, the use of open source software is routine. Despite this, many organizations find using open source software frustrating and confusing. This is not the fault of OSS, but of an opportunity for organizations and the individuals within them to learn how to use open source software more effectively." And I think this is a perfect quote to start this talk. So, who am I and why am I able to talk about this? My name is Alex. This is me on holiday last week. I think this kind of sums up my personality quite well, and this is probably one of the more serious talks I've ever done. If you don't know where this is mini Europe in Brussels, Belgium. I got a little excited by the idea that I could just climb all over things for about 2 hours. So I've been working with open source since 2012. I graduated from university with a degree that was absolutely nothing to do with technology. It was creative writing, actually. But I got lucky, and my first job outside of university was at Red Hat. And I got that job because my favorite color was red, and I applied, and that was it. So over the course of the last 8 years, I've had the privilege to work for and with companies that are leading the charge in the open source world. Red Hat, Rackspace, now SUSE, and affiliations with Intel, and of course, every other company that contributes to OpenStack. At the moment, I'm an elected member of the technical committee, and I'm the vice chair. I've also previously held the position as the OpenStack Manual's project technical lead. So I've been around a little while, and I've been a full-time contributor, a part-time contributor, a unpaid contributor. I've been a little bit of everything. So this is me and how I fit in. Let's get started. Right, so it would be nice if everything was free, right? If you had free water, free food, free electricity, it would just be endgame. Sounds a bit like a dream, really. But some people dream about free software, and maybe I didn't once upon a time, but now this is a thing, and we're all in the business of delivering that. Free software means a lot to many. It's not just a good business decision, it's an ideology that people subscribe to. So most of the most notable examples of free and open source software are not just Unix and subsequently Linux, but we're looking at everyday things like Mozilla Firefox and Chromium, some of the biggest communities other than OpenStack. So open source software, though, comes with a price, which is human resources. So while automation and AI is 100% the future, and we're looking forward to that, software is still initially written by humans. And right, that's great. So how and why do we as humans work on open source code and the documentation that supports it? It's not just, anyway, number one, you're being paid to do so by a company. Number two, it's for fun, right? People very much enjoy this, it's a hobby. And number three, it's a fantastic way to build an online resume. So to get a little bit started and really dive into things, I kind of want to set the scene of where we're going here. So I'll provide an example loosely based on my own experiences and sort of give you an idea of how I came to think about this, doing this talk. So you're looking for a job. You love working for open source. You love working with open source. You find a company that supports open source, and they seem to hold the same ideologies that you do. Great, fantastic. You apply, you get the job. Awesome. This is amazing. You've succeeded in finding the company that feels the same way you do. But you get in, and day two, you're sitting there and your boss looks at you and they say, okay, cool, we love open source and we're so excited to hire you because you're a big and important person. But we actually do everything in this repository here. It's open sourced, but we just like to do it in-house first, and then we push it upstream. that kind of makes you feel a little bit awkward. I mean, who's heard that before? Who's had that? Right, it's a little, I don't know, disheartening, right? You're spending all your time, you're really energetic, and then you kind of feel, I don't know, cheated, right? Sounds familiar. So, with this though, I see clear 3 problems. Number 1, just because you're open source does not mean you're openly collaborating. So you're working for this company, and they've got their little open source repository. No one's collaborating to that. That's not a community. That's completely different. We'll get into that in a little bit further. Number 2, individual contributors and technical leaders are not business strategists. You guys are thinking of totally different outcomes. So you have technical leaders and you have individual contributors who are experts in their field. You also have business strategists who are experts in their field as well, but they're not talking to you and you're not talking to them. So they're making key business decisions that are separate to you. We'll get more into that as well. And number 3, oh my gosh, my counting is very bad. Working openly downstream is not working upstream, an open collaboration environment. Like open source and open collaboration, they are distinctly different things. Like especially the example of OpenStack, which we'll get into further as well. Right, so open source. Let's define open source first of all so we can have the clear distinction between the two. Open source is the way in which code is actually released under a specific license. Open source is not the ideology, it's the function. Those familiar with licensing will recognize that we utilize things like Apache 2.0 and Creative Commons in open source projects all the time. Everyone, like licensing is incredibly important with open source. Open source enables me, you, your employer, to actively distribute and change and work with a specific software for anyone, for any purpose. And one of the most successful businesses at this, and I don't think anyone will argue with me, is Red Hat. So going forward, I was told never to quote at all from Wikipedia, but this was a quote on Wikipedia, so I think it's legitimate. Regardless, I think this perfectly sums up what we're doing with OpenStack. The reliance on goal-orientated yet loosely coordinated participants who interact and create a product of economic value, which they make available to contributors and non-contributors alike. OpenStack, over the last 10 years, has seen over 400 companies contribute. That's enormous, and I don't think anyone can dispute that. But it's also now branched away for other communities such as Kubernetes to develop an equally diverse and engaging community. But again, just because a project is open doesn't mean people are going to contribute it. Collaboration is not a technical issue, it's a social issue. Simply saying my project is open and you can contribute to it does not mean you will automatically generate a successful collaborative environment and reap the rewards from that. They are not synonymous. The second issue is that contributors are not business strategists. You, as a technology professional, most likely were not hired to make key business decisions. And some of those that are lucky will continue to work forwards and grow in the business and develop into higher C-level and director positions, and that's fantastic. But honestly, it's kind of a good thing that the technical and the business are separated. I'm a technical writer by day, right? And I consider myself a relative expert in that field, and I appreciate that everyone that I work with does as well. But I was not hired for my business decisions. I'm hired because I'm an expert in that field, and I should be. And that's important, and everybody else is in the same boat. So a business strategist, if we want to define it, takes ideas, creates viable plans, and executes them strategically, and ultimately turns those ideas into reality. In other words, it's responsibility of the business strategist to advocate the best course of action and achieve the desired business goals. Can I get a show of hands? Who does that? Who is lucky enough to be a little bit of both? That guy. All right, awesome. A business, though, any business, is structured in such a way that there are business-minded management teams, and those that specialize in other areas. It could be operations, marketing, sales, development. It doesn't make them any less important. They're just not the same thing. We can't all go to business school and get an MBA, because firstly, it's incredibly expensive. But not all of us have that brain, that mind. And that's still a good thing. We're meant to be diverse. And then on the other side, individual contributors and technical leaders can get really bogged down in the community, and they kind of lose sight of the business goals. And sometimes they're not even told the business goals. And we'll get more into that as well. As an individual contributor, I care about OpenStack, right? And what's happening there, but not how it's really being implemented in my company. That decision is being left up to other people who specialize in that. And that's a level of respect that needs to be created. Right, who's heard this before? Anybody? You know, make the change in our repository, push it upstream afterwards. We'll pull everything from upstream and include our content afterwards. Like an afterthought, right? We're open though, right? Of course we are. So to ensure we're all on the same page, let's define what upstream and downstream is specific to this environment. So upstream refers to the direction toward the original authors or maintainers of software that is distributed as source code. So for example, a patch sent upstream is offered to the original authors or maintainers of the software. Downstream refers to the direction away from the original authors or maintainers of the software, and is a qualification of a patch. For example, a patch sent downstream is offered to the developers or maintainers of a forked software project. Working upstream effectively is genuinely not an easy task. I've been doing it for 6 years now, and it comes with a lot of complications and problems. If you're continuously switching between downstream and upstream, that's almost worse. Not only are you trying to work with 2 different tooling sets, but you're working with 2 completely different sets of people. And to continuously generate that mind shift change, you're losing time, energy, and money expecting people to do that. By the same token, it's hard to work downstream all the time and randomly push code upstream. The communities are not particularly interested in drive-by code. Who here has been asked to implement a massive change by their company, and they've pushed it up and it's been rejected, or you've had negative comments and you've had to deal with that over and over again, right? It's a little disheartening as well, right? You're sitting there and you're like, I have put so much effort and work into this. I should be able to get this through, but people are rejecting you because they don't know you. That's a tough one to deal with. So, how do we fix these issues? How do we solve for X and balance our workloads effectively and efficiently? It's easy to say, here's what we're doing wrong and why it's a problem, but actually coming up with ideas and solutions to that problem is pretty difficult. And I'm gonna go a little off-piste here and say, writing this talk was hard, because I understand these problems from a personal point of view, and I have dealt with them time and time again. And the conversations I'm having are always the same. You know, why aren't we doing this? Where are we going? And it's kind of hard to convince people who don't want to listen. So this is my take on it, and hopefully you find some of this a little bit helpful. All right, so in my research the last couple months thinking this through, I identified 3 clear solutions. Geez. All right, number 1, having a clear strategy, a business strategy that stretches across the whole department. Number 2, setting expectations and individual goals. And number 3, understanding what your version of downstream is. All right, let's go into that a little bit more. So, having a clear strategy that is uniform across all teams. You do not want multiple teams doing the same thing in multiple places. I can't stress that enough. If I've got Matt here and he's working on a particular solution for A, and his manager has told him that, Kendall's manager has told her the exact same thing, they don't speak, right? But they're working on the same thing. There is a clear difference between dividing and conquering and making like multiplications of the same thing. Now, what this ends up happening is people are in silos. And Kendall has no idea what Matt's doing, and unlike actual silos, one day they will speak. And you know what ends up happening? Matt says, hey, I'm working on this thing. Kendall says, hey, I'm working on that thing too. And they feel railroaded, right? They feel like they've been cheated of the work they're doing because someone else has actually been doing this the whole time. What a waste of time. I could have been doing something more effective and more efficient, right? So that's that. Having no clear strategy across your department leaves you open to creative, intense, and divisive environments, which I've seen countless times. This is a primary case of a technical issue creating more social problems. Something, as honestly techs, we spend an incredible amount of time avoiding. If there's a technical problem, if there's a social problem, I can't count the amount of times I've seen people try to implement a technical solution. Oh, we need a new messaging platform. Oh, we need a new way to communicate. Let's go to O365 instead of Google. Someone will figure something out that is technically minded. So communication is incredibly key. From day one, you guys need to be communicating, and it'll help you generate a faster route to success. Ensuring project management is aware, including all facets of the business in your planning meetings. If you think, for example, that you've actually got everybody involved, you've got product marketing, you've got development, you've got the training team, but why haven't you involved the QA team? Are they not important? They're incredibly important to the delivery process and they need to be there. Make sure that everyone is there and working together. So, who has have the go work upstream as part of their daily remit? That's your instruction. That's actually you were hired to go work upstream. Anybody had that? Right, yeah, so have I. I got lucky. That was my job for 3 years, and I was, honestly, I got in a super lucky position where my manager knew open source incredibly well. And from day one, she sat us down with clear objectives that were measurable to the company. So she knew what, we used to work for Rackspace, what Rackspace wanted, and she figured out how I could fit in and how I could fit into the OpenStack community. So taking her prime example, you need to be making sure you setting up goals. Maybe they're along the lines of being a core contributor, furthering that, becoming a PTL. Further than that, working on being elected to the technical committee or the user committee, or going as far and getting involved with the board. There are special interest groups, the SIGs, that are run by some of our key people that have been around for a long time. It's an amazing opportunity for your employers to, for your employees to have a purpose. Go work upstream is not a solution. It's not something that works. And that has been shown specifically by the collaboration of several different companies. Metrics matter. Metrics matter to business strategists, and you need to make sure metrics are being measured. So this is actually my favorite slide. Define what you want out of a project. Help educate your management. You too can do that. Create a definition of what you want to be working towards, and work towards that. You need to do sometimes you need to do the legwork to help others understand what you all want to achieve. Don't be afraid to stand up and say, this is beneficial to us, the company, me, let me show you how. I feel like a lot of people that I've spoken to over the last couple of years have stood back. They weren't given a clear enough objective, so they don't really know where they fit in. Don't be afraid to go find that objective yourself. There is no reason why you have to sit there and float. So, to link this awesome slide in, this is a bit of a stretch, I'll be honest. As Inigo Montoya does so brilliantly, manage the expectations of the relationships you form in the workplace and your communities. Don't be afraid to build relationships and be obvious at what you're doing. There's no shame in joining a community like Kubernetes, OpenStack, Kata Containers, Sterling X, any of them, and saying, you know what, my company has asked me to get X over the line. Help me do that. Don't sit in the background and fetter away at something and be embarrassed that perhaps you're working for the corporate good. Because sometimes that makes people a little anxious. You know, everybody wants to feel like what they're doing is for love, especially in open source. But don't be afraid to show what you're here for. It doesn't make you any different. So, this is the key one. As discussed, downstream and upstream are not the same thing when it comes to open source. They can be in the same production line. They can be linear. But more often than not, it isn't implemented properly. To be clear, there are really good reasons to work downstream and then push upstream. And I can definitely see that, and I've worked that way in the past. Whether this is due to legalities, a pre-existing structure and process that kind of works fairly seamlessly. But more often than not, if you're working downstream and pushing upstream, you're working backwards. So you'll find yourself forking the initial code. You work on that code in your little repository, you push it back upstream. But upstream is a moving target. So within a couple of weeks, you'll have to refork that code, play around with it, replay the changes on top of it, and then push it back up. Not only that, you're maintaining code in 2 separate places. And again, there is seamless ways to integrate this and make this work. But if you're doing something behind closed doors, but you're actually in an open GitHub repository, you're still working backwards and you're still creating double overhead for yourself. So upstream is a moving target, as I said, and you're making this harder for yourself. If you want to work backwards, make sure it's viable first, and have an executable plan that doesn't have your people, your colleagues, duplicating their time and effort. Because what it comes down to for business is your time is money. And if you're spending your time maintaining code in 2 separate places, that's costing. That's not effective or efficient from anyone's point of view. So while understanding what is downstream, you need to understand upstream too. Upstream is primarily about the community. it has everything to do with it, to be honest with you. And forming those relationships is one of the most important things. It's not just about the tech, it's open collaboration. It's hard to be effective if you're working through and pushing drive-by commits up. As we pointed out before, people are disheartened and feel like their work is not getting done because they're being blocked. But they're being blocked because they're not being allowed to make relationships and build the community and build themselves into that community. If you try to push through a patch without context, it's most likely to be knocked back and accepted because it's a haphazard way of working. And that is continuously proven by the amount of times people spend hours and hours of their work and then to push upstream and it's knocked back. At the end of the day, it's up to you how you want to work. But from an upstream point of view, this is where we stand. Anyway, that was nice and quick. Questions? Nice. Front row. Oh, you might have to go to the microphone because of the recording. Sorry.
Or you can repeat it.
Oh, I can repeat it. Oh, sorry.
So the idea of upstream and downstream is easy, to my opinion, and the reasons why upstream has a lot of advantages. The way more difficult question is how do you actually persuade or convince someone who isn't following this path? This is the hard part.
It's an incredibly hard part, and that's kind of what actually was the primary reason for my thinking behind most of this. So I said we had 3 solutions, which was, now I have to go back again and think this all through, but understanding what your downstream is, setting your expectations, and defining individual goals and having a clear strategy, right? That's important not only at your level, but a business level. So if the business side, in my eyes, are turning to you and they're saying, right, we need you to work upstream, and you're saying, okay, cool, how do you want me to do this? To me, it's up to you as a technical leader to define that process. A lot of the time, you find yourself working a little bit, I don't know, separately, I guess is the way I'd say it. Because a business leader is not going to be in the OpenStack community or an open source community, so they don't really have that clear definition. To me, that's for all of us to help educate and continuously express this, because it's incredibly frustrating. You're sitting there and you're like, I understand how this is working and I can see the benefits of doing one thing over another, but it doesn't make monetary sense to them perhaps, or time sense. So come up with a way to define that to them and show them that your time is money and this is how we can work together to make this a beneficial environment. I think, honestly, it's so hard, but you have to continuously communicate your expectations to them because they're not going to know on their own. It's not their job, it's our job. And I think that's important. We have so much, we expect so much from our upper levels, thinking, you know, maybe the office of the CEO should really understand what I'm doing. There's an amazing talk. It's called Said No CEO Ever. And if you want to Google that, I recommend it. I admittedly, Casey West did the talk. And one of the things he said is, your CEO doesn't care about your high availability solution. He doesn't care about what monitoring you pick. He cares that it works and it works for the customer. So keep that in mind when you're having those thoughts about how can I change the hearts and minds of management and make sure I'm exploring the right options. It's basically where I would be at, and that's kind of what I'm trying, to be honest. It might not work, but wish me luck. Anybody else? I think I ran through that quite quick. Sorry if I spoke too fast. I do that. Cool. Thanks, everybody.